I will call the meeting to order. Welcome to the PSC meeting for April 27th. And I will open with the standard PSC COVID opening. In keeping with the Oregon Public Meeting Laws, statutory land use hearing requirements in Title 13 of the Portland City Code, the Portland Planning Sustainability Commission is holding this meeting virtually. All members of the PSC are attending remotely, and the city has made several avenues available for the public to watch the broadcast of this meeting. The PSC is taking these steps as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to limit in-person contact and promote social distancing. The pandemic is an emergency that threatens the public health, safety, and welfare, which requires us to meet remotely by electronic communications. Thank you all for your patience, humor, flexibility, and understanding as we manage through this difficult situation to do the city's business. And with that, I will open the floor to items of interest from commissioners. And I think we'll start with Mike Halk has a note in passing.
Yeah, thanks, Eli. Yeah, Joe Porosky, who is in the geography department at Portland State for 31 years, served on the Urban Forestry Commission, and in fact, chaired the commission. Among the many contributions he made to the city and the region, he was the first person to map all 105 neighborhoods for their urban forest canopy. And this is back in the early 90s, and pointed out the inequities of distribution of forest canopy. And I think that work kind of laid the groundwork for some of the input we've gotten with regard to urban heat island and inequities related to exposure to urban heat island. And given he was on a sister commission, I just thought it would be reasonable to take just a moment and remember Joe for all his contributions today before we got going with business.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I actually sent you all a list of all the contributions he made, which are pretty legion. Thanks a lot for allowing me to do that.
Thank you, Mike. Other items of interest. I have a couple I'll jump in with. One of them is Multnomah County. They have a Sustainability Commission and a Planning Commission that are separate. And their Sustainability Commission just recommended a proposal to the County Commission, which they passed, which will make all county buildings fossil fuel free going forward. And you know, there's a bond passed for libraries, so that's one of the examples of the kind of buildings the county builds that will help lead towards the city-county joint efforts to decrease climate gases and meet some pretty aggressive targets we have. So that's one update. Another is I've had at various times connections with our compatriots in Seattle. They got a planning commission, which is somewhat different from ours. Grace Kim was the chair for a while, and recently Eric Engstrom sort of reconnected me with David Goldberg, who serves there now. And there's some interest if you want to have just a social chat with them, compare notes. We have some similarities between our cities, obviously differences too. And we'd of course have to make sure there's not a quorum issue, but there's members on their commission who'd be interested in doing that with us. And it might be something that would be interesting to just do with them. So this would be informal. They're already kind of taking some lead on it. And I just wanted to see if there might be interest in that. This could be about role or subject matter, what they're dealing with. I'm seeing some, okay. So I'll take this as a let's explore further, and I'll let them keep taking the lead on it. And any other items of interest? All right, Jeff, yes.
I had a question. I saw in our packet today a little discussion about two bills in Salem having to do with sustainability that the city is supporting. And so it sparked in my mind a question about, I know there's at least one land use bill pending in Salem that I don't believe the city is going to support, but it's a bill that really comes right out of RIP. And it's a bill that would in effect streamline small subdivisions with an eye towards middle housing, a topic we discussed when we were doing RIP. And so one, I'm wondering about that bill in particular, but I'm also wondering if there's an opportunity maybe at a next meeting at some point where we could get some update either from the Legislative Affairs Office or Andrea, whoever would be appropriate, to just maybe just a quick update on land use planning bills that we might be interested in, just if they have an opportunity, if they're moving, does the city support them, not support them? Just kind of give us an overview so we know what's happening in Salem that's kind of in our ballpark. So
yeah, thanks, Jeff. We can certainly do. We were planning on doing an update after session and give you a sense of kind of how things landed and how things fared with the priorities that VPS is working on. If you want a mid-session update, I'm happy to check in. Tom Armstrong is taking the lead on the planning side and tracking those bills, and we can see about his availability. Just give a quick update for commissioners if that's of interest.
That would be great. I mean, as I said, one in particular I thought was so relevant to what we've been talking about. I'd be curious to both know its status and understand what the city's, if I'm correct in this, city's reluctance to support it is. Just understand that. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Andrea, Director's Report. Welcome.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy sunny Tuesday. Quick report, actually, not too much to report, but some exciting news that tomorrow Council will have their final vote of shelter to housing continuum. So we'll be concluding that work here shortly. And then the design overlay zone amendment process, DOZA, starts at Council on May 12th. So that is a day for public hearing, and I believe Kat will be representing the PSC at that hearing. So looking forward to starting that conversation with Council. And we'll bring an update on shelter to housing continuum changes and things as we're trying to do in practice at the next meeting, which is, I do want to remind folks, is not your normally scheduled meeting. It is May 4th, not May 11th. So we'll be meeting on May 4th, and we're going to give an update on shelter to housing then.
Thank you. Well, with that, I think we're going to move into our first agenda item, Historic Resources Code Project. And for that, we'll be led by Brandon and Shannon from staff, and also joined by Chair Minor. Welcome.
Hey, Eli, can you do the consent agenda, please?
I'm sorry. Thank you for reminding me that when I missed something. Let's do a consent agenda to consider the minutes from the April 13th, 2021 meeting. Is there any motion to accept?
Move adoption.
Thank you, Chris.
Steph seconds.
Steph seconds. Okay. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, minutes are adopted. Thank you for that reminder. And now we will go over to the Historic Resources Code Project. I understand that our new commissioners, Jesse and Valeria, have had a chance to study up on this one. And also we have, as we've traditionally done with this project, invited Chair Minor from the Historic Landmarks Commission to join us. Welcome. So let's open up here with any identities of interest to share before we start going through the items. Okay, then let's begin, and I will let Brandon guide us through this. And I guess I want to open up for 1 minute here. This is some complicated stuff, and I've had a little catching up myself on this. So if you ever get to an item that is like, what is it we're voting on? Or I forgot that one, or what did we decide last time? Or does staff like this, or does staff think it's garbage? Then please assume that if you got that question, someone else does too. Don't be shy about asking as we go through here. So with that caveat, take it away.
Well, maybe I'll give it a little introduction.
Okay.
Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Sandra Wood, Bureau of Planning Sustainability. Thank you again for having us. Brandon Spencer and Shannon Buno are here from the project team to represent us. I just wanted to recap where we have been and why we're so excited to be here today. We're expecting the commission to make the votes on the amendments and make the final vote on the package, which is what we're doing today. You held hearings in late 2020, and looking at Brandon's memo, it looks like you've had 5 work sessions. Those previous work sessions, you've discussed everything that's on the table today, but you've only done straw polls and given us instructions to go and write the actual zoning code language. So you hopefully should recognize all 14 ideas that are on the table today, and you have the actual zoning code language as it's proposed. In addition to those work sessions, the Historic Landmarks Commission and the PSC had 3 members of each of the commissions joining as a 3x3. They met 4 times to hash out some of the details. So you have that work in front of you too. Before I pass it on to Brandon, who can start with item number 1, well, what we were thinking we would do today is go through each item. He'll explain what the item is, and the commissioner who is the sponsor can say a couple things if you need to, if you want to, and there can be some discussion, and then we'll do a roll call on each of the items. So there'll be 14 votes. It's a little tedious. We thought about batching them, but we didn't know how to batch them because we didn't know if people had issues. So bear with us. I'm sorry for so many votes. So it's 14 votes for the amendments and then the final vote for the full package. And we will get through it, and we thank you in advance for your patience for all of that. And Chair Minor, of course, is here to lend the Landmarks Commission's perspective on all the amendments. One other thing before I forget to mention it, on Thursday, both the Design Commission and the Historic Landmarks Commission will be at City Council with their state of design and state of historic resources or something like that. State of
historic preservation.
Yeah. Thank you. State of historic preservation. It's a yearly report that each of those commissions make to the City Council about what they have worked on all year. And before you think, gosh, where is our report to City Council? Which I know several of you have thought about that because we've talked about this. Remember, our collective thinking about that is that your reports go to City Council as you make legislative recommendations to City Council. So they saw shelter to housing, they know DOZA is coming from you. So they are very grateful for your input on all of those projects. So with that, I think we've sent you the reports for those 2 commissions, and you can of course live stream watch it or watch it late at night at the convenience of your own home on Thursday. So Brandon, let's get started on the 14 amendments.
Thanks, Sandra. And just for everyone's knowledge for what we'll do tonight, many of these amendments came from multiple commissioners, maybe identified an issue or made a request. And so what you'll see is some of the amendments have multiple commissioner names next to the amendment. Those are really just the commissioners who originally raised the issue. And we would look to those commissioners first to make a motion. And you'll see one amendment does not have a commissioner name associated with it. It was a good idea that the full commission straw polled to give staff direction to write. So we will need, when we get to that amendment, which I think is maybe amendment 12 or something, we'll need someone to motion since I don't have a commissioner name next to it. What we'll do after, we'll go through each amendment, we'll do a roll call vote on each one after discussion. At the end, we'll do a final vote. And then to follow that final vote, we'll have a few minutes for a round robin for anything that is on commissioners' minds about these code amendments, future work, further direction from staff to follow up on the March 23rd meeting. So if you have bigger picture things to say, we do have a little bit of time at the end. And before I get into the first amendment, Eli, could we do disclosure since this is going to be the night where we do a vote?
I tried doing that earlier. I didn't get any takers. So are there any disclosures?
I thought you were asking for items of interest. I can step up. So Kristen Minor, Chair of the Landmarks Commission, and I wish to disclose that I do live in Irvington, which is a historic district in Portland. I also have put numerous city-owned and non-city-owned Portland properties on the National Register. Thanks.
Thank you. Any others? All right, back to you.
Great. So I will be sharing my screen. We'll come on and off with the shared screen. For those of you who have not worked through an amendment package, what you'll see in the packet is that we have a short description of each of the amendments. If you want greater detail on those, we can talk through it, or you can go to the handouts from the dates where we discuss this with the full commission. And then after the short description about what the amendment would achieve, you'll see the changed code language. Changes that are executed by the amendment are included in shaded text, but areas where text has been deleted from the proposed draft, you'll see it just shows that the text has been deleted. So we'll walk through those if there are questions, but you're really looking for areas where text has been deleted or shaded text for where it's changed. At the end of the night tonight, we'll ask the commission to make a recommendation that directs staff to continue to refine the staff report and the commentary that goes along with the code. And then we'll also ask that you recommend that the council adopt the amended Volume 1 and Volume 2 staff report and code amendments. So we'll do that at the very end. And we will dive right in tonight to talk about these 14 amendments. This is the handout that went out on Friday. So I think everyone who is on the commission and Chair Minor would have this. And the first amendment would be a change to the process by which districts, historic and conservation districts, are designated, removed, or their status changed from historic to conservation. And this amendment would require there to be a joint hearing whenever there was a proposal to designate, remove, or amend the level of protection between the Historic Landmarks Commission and the Planning and Sustainability Commission. And that joint hearing would result in a Planning and Sustainability Commission recommendation to City Council. So the change here is requiring both bodies to be present for the public hearing, but retaining the PSC's role as the recommending body to City Council.
I'll move the amendment.
I will second that. Any discussion on that amendment? I will make one comment that one reason I like this is we've done this with Urban Forestry Commission, I think maybe with DOZA, and it's just more efficient for us and it's more efficient for the public to speak to one body instead of two when they might otherwise be confused who they should say what to. Any further discussion? And I should say, I will need people to raise their virtual hands if over this process, because I'm not seeing everyone's faces at once. But not hearing any more discussion, Julie, can you call a roll call?
Yes. Backrack?
Yes. Yes.
Sorry, Mike, is your hand up to discuss or?
No, I'm sorry. I thought you said you wanted us to raise our virtual hands. So.
Oh, if you want to discuss, I will need to see that.
Oh, no.
Okay, continue with the roll call. Thanks.
All right. Bortolazzo?
Yes.
Gidemeyer?
Yes.
Hauk?
Yes.
Larcel?
Yes.
Magniera?
Yes.
McWilliams?
Yes.
Routh?
Yes.
Schultz?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Spivak?
Yes. Amendment 1 passes unanimously. Let's do number 2.
Great, thanks. I feel like we're all going to, in our dreams tonight, hear yes and no over and over again. This is going to be good. Amendment 2 makes changes to the approval criteria used for designation of landmarks and districts and removal of designation of landmarks and districts to bring greater parity between the two processes, designation and removal, and to provide more clarity for applicants and decision makers. One thing I should note on this is that you'll see there may be a few pieces of code that read a little clunky. We do have state land use goal 5 regulations that have to be included in the code for the process of designating and removing landmarks and districts. And so those are included, but we haven't gone beyond those.
Thank you. I got a question from Jeff.
Yeah, I've got 2 issues. And the first one is the one you invited Eli by saying, gee, I think I remember talking about something months ago, but I can't remember what we decided, and it's not in there. And this is not one you've got amended. It's 846030D1, which for those following in your hymn book is on page 187. And there's a change there. The current code has, to demonstrate the significance of a historic resource. Can you get it up on the screen, Brandon?
Yeah, give me just 1 minute, Jeff.
Can you repeat the number, Jeff?
It's 846030D1. It's on page 186, on 187, if you have your code book. I can take a shot at
which letter are you referring to, Jeff?
it's D1.
D1, and there's many, just the one
Just
before
the
we get
one.
into the letters?
Not,
Okay.
So if you see D1, the current code says to be designated a historic resource, you have to meet 3 of the factors A through G. We're now changing that to just 1 of those factors. And I thought my memory is a little shaky on what we talked about here, but I'm wondering why we're doing that. It strikes me by saying by going from 3 to 1 factors, you're making it a little bit easier to designate something as a historic resource. Before it had to meet 3 factors, now it only needs to meet 1. And I'm wondering why we're reducing the factors. We've got a long list of factors. Seems to me if you're worthy of historic designation, you should be able to meet 3 of them. That's the current code. So I'm not sure I would go along with reducing to 1, but I do not remember our discussion about why it was reduced from 3 to 1. So, Brandon.
Yeah, good question, Jeff. So what we're looking at is the let's say the necessary ingredients for a landmark or district to be eligible for designation. And in today's code, we have a lengthy list of different themes in history or areas of history that may make something architecturally, culturally, et cetera, significant. In the 2017 Goal 5 rule, the Goal 5 rule tells us that the city at a minimum needs to look at the 4 types of historic significance that the National Park Service uses. That would be A, B, C, or D, and then can add on to that anything that may be more, how do I want to say this, determined significant at the local level based upon the comprehensive plan or local areas of history. And so what we decided to do was to streamline and to follow that Goal 5 directive, to use those 4 areas of historic significance and then to build on those 4 areas a few other areas of significance that we might see locally. And so really, I think when our hope was to find parity with Goal 5 and to reduce the number of factors at the end of the day that are included in the code.
I'm not sure I'm tracking that explanation. I mean, Goal 5 doesn't mandate factors you have to, they're not approval criteria. They give you a baseline of, stop me when I'm wrong here. They give you a baseline of factors you should consider. And then they say, but local governments, you can consider more. I don't see, and so the factors are there. In this case, we've got A through G. So what's that, 8 factors, and maybe there's more. But
Jeff, if you go to 191, you'll find the second item, I think.
Yeah, but those that's integrity. That's its own sub-factor. So I'm just looking at 1. So to be designated historic landmark, the first criteria is number 1. There's 2 and 3, but I'm not talking about those. So the first factor is number 1, and it used to say meet 3 of these following factors.
And what I think, Jeff, what Brandon is saying. So if you look at page 189, the next page, okay, there were many more factors before. That's what you're saying, right, Brandon? That before there was all that strike through language, A through L.
Right. So I get that. We've gone from 12 factors to 8 factors. Mm-hmm. Okay. But my point again is this is one set of criteria, and it seems to me we should meet 3 of them as we used to, because we don't want to be designating historic resources unless they warrant it. And I'm just concerned, we used to have 12 and you have to meet 3. Now we have 8 and you only have to meet 1. It just seems to me there should be more than 1. That if this is a significant enough decision, we should be looking at all these factors, and you should certainly be able to meet more than 1 to warrant. So I guess the explanation I got for why we went to 3 to 1 doesn't strike me as streamlining, nor is it mandated by Goal 5. So I guess I propose going back to 3 or maybe 2, but not just 1.
Okay, thank you. Let's get some other comments. I got Kristen and then Oriana.
Oh, damn it.
Just very quickly, I did want to point out, Sandra already mentioned this, but yes, we got rid of a number of those criteria under number 1. But then also in the very beginning of this, it says that you have to meet all of the following approval criteria. So you have to meet 1, 2, and 3. Right? Yeah, so you see that. So you're not only meeting the significance, but then you have to meet integrity, and then you have to meet the appropriate level of protection. So you have to meet, each of those 3. That's all I want to say.
Understood. Thank you. I guess it was a lot of order. Oriana, you're next.
Oh, I was muted. Thanks, Eli. So I actually am resonating a little bit with what Jeff is raising here, that there's the bar that Kristen has just described of significance, integrity, and protection, but the bar for significance has been changed. 1, by reducing this list, which seems like a sensible streamlining, but then 2, by reducing what qualifies as significance. What is a little bit concerning to me as I look at this now, and apologies for not noticing or raising this earlier, but the bar to achieve significance from the perspective of underrepresented communities is the same as any other significance, which might seem fair on its surface, but given the history of historic resources and whose history has been preserved and designated, and the goals of this project around increasing equity, I might propose that you have a significance that qualifies with 1 piece, which is the underrepresented, and then 3 for anything else. So you make it much easier to designate a resource for an underrepresented community, but a slightly higher bar. So you start to balance out our inventory a little bit more. Apologies if that starts to cause some trouble, but I think there's a pretty big equity concern when there's only 1 that has to be picked here, because it will undervalue E significantly versus other things, I think, and it won't necessarily lead to an increase in the number of historic resources that benefit communities in the way that we've talked quite a bit about in this project.
Thank you. I saw Katie's hand up, but I'm not seeing it up now. Jeff?
No, I took it down because, I basically think that if you only need to pick 1, then there's more likelihood that some property that represents just kind of a slice of history that, as Oriana was saying, I kind of disagree with her. I think that if it's in there, then it can be picked just for that one thing. It can be pretty, it doesn't have to fit all of the other criteria. So that's all I was going to say. I don't think it should be 3, definitely.
I hand up that when I went through this packet, I put down just 1 too easy to meet was my note on my piece of paper. And one of those is resource listed on the National Register of Historic Places, which the city has no role in that process. You could now use that to meet item number 1 of significance. And so I'd be amenable to an amendment on this one.
If I might, Chair Minor, or Chair Spivak, and then Chair Minor with their hand up, maybe I want to give a little more explanation of what's going on here, because I don't want to lose the forest for the trees in this. Commissioner McNair is exactly right about the criterion E. One of the areas we wanted to ensure was that if a resource has significance to a community that hasn't been represented appropriately in our historic resource inventory, which are many communities, as we know, we wanted there to be a very logical place for that discussion to land, that it wasn't shoehorning into the criteria that have been used by the National Park Service or locally for a long time, and that it could be a separate discussion from something that may be architecturally significant or significance derived from some sort of a cultural pattern or community pattern that's more of a dominant narrative. But what we wanted to do was to be more thoughtful about how resources are designated. Today's list of approval criteria really rely on this A through L exploration of areas of history. And this list is something that dates back to the early 1990s, really thinking about architectural importance or sort of the founding father mentality. But what it doesn't do is think about whether or not the district or building or landscape today still conveys its historic importance, which is why we added the new criterion for integrity, that the place has to still maintain its architectural, cultural, archaeological qualities to be significant. And then more to the point, we did look at goal 5, which tells us pretty explicitly that A, B, C, and D are sort of the basis for local government decision-making. We don't have to limit it to that. But those A through D come from the National Park Service National Register Program, something that is used in evaluating historic resources. We didn't think that was enough, which is why we included E. But to arrive at a designation for a landmark or district, you do have to demonstrate significance. And we've proposed to do that a little different than how it's done today. You would have to meet integrity, which is a new expectation, and determine an appropriate level of protection. If ever there's a designation for something that's not an individual landmark, this body would see that as a legislative procedure. So if the proposal were to designate a district, that would come to the PSC at the joint hearing. But part of the process is thinking about individual property owners who may be seeking use of one of the adaptive reuse incentives. Maybe they have the opportunity to convert a large house that has historic significance to multiple dwelling units or an accessory commercial use. And since there's a quasi-judicial path for landmark designation, we didn't want to stack the deck to a place that made it hard or impossible for that owner who may be looking to take advantage of regulatory incentives, the sort of opportunity to do something creative and different with their property as a landmark. But we did want to make sure that there was that appropriate level of protection piece. And if it's not the right thing to do to protect it, then we don't protect it.
Eli, I would propose amendment if that's appropriate. I would propose we amend 1 to say that you demonstrate significance by meeting either subsection E, so that makes it a standalone, or 3 of the other listed factors.
Well, let's go to our focus. Oriana, do you want to jump in and then Kristen? And then let's go to our process where we make a motion and amend it as we need. Okay. First, let's do a couple more comments here first. So, Oriana?
I just wanted to express support for what Jeff has put on the table. I think it makes sense. And I think perhaps there was a little bit of misunderstanding from other folks, but I think Jeff has kind of gotten at what I was intending, which is a fast track for underrepresented communities' history, and then a higher bar for histories and landmarks that don't come from underrepresented communities. So thank you, Jeff. You'll be getting a second from me.
Kristen.
Thanks. I think the Landmarks Commission is totally looking to do what we can to make sure that underrepresented communities get designations. But to say that 3 other of these, have to be met every time, that's a really high bar, because each of these, the way that a nomination works, there's factors that sort of toss out, paths towards certain sections of significance. I mean, it's really a it would be really hard to find a property, in other words, that met, not only the underrepresented community, but then also 3 others. I literally can't think of a property that can do that. So you would be really making a huge change with that.
Okay, I'm going to go to Kat Schultz and then Mike.
I have to say, I'm intrigued by the E, or the others. I cannot support 3 if the or is of 3 of the remaining 7. You've just raised the bar even more. And I would say, which then leaves you down to 2 of the 7, which is almost about the same. But I guess I'm kind of with Kristen. I'm a little bit concerned. These are options. This is really coming into play for individual land, property owners. And I think it's hard enough having a historic property to just add. Like I said, this is individual choice. They're choosing to do that, giving them the path to do it, and making that path easy to go down a process that's not easy, by the way, I have a hard time supporting. At the same time, I like the spirit of how to promote item E over the others, but I don't know how you do it. I can't figure it out, because to go 2 of the remaining 7 doesn't feel right to me either. So I guess generally I don't see that I can support the amendment.
I'm going to go to Mike, and then I really want to actually pose an amendment before, and then we can discuss it again in that context. So Mike?
Yeah, I agree with Kat and Kristen. I'm totally behind elevating underrepresented communities. That's fine, but not 3 criteria.
Okay, so does someone like to make a motion, and then we can always do a discussion on the amendment. Let's someone to make a motion on this amendment number 2.
I'll give it a shot. I will modify my draft motion. But first, let me say, people are calling it dramatic to go to 3 criteria. That is the current code. The current code is 3 of 12. So it leads me to think, well, then 2 of 8 is consistent with the current code. So I would make an amendment similar to what I started with, that you can be deemed significant if you meet subsection E or 2 of the remaining 7 criteria.
Can I step back for a moment for process? This is,
I'm sorry, we're asking for a motion.
I'm looking for a motion for amendment number 2, which actually addresses several other items totally separate from this, and then we can amend that if we want to. Does that make sense?
So for purposes of discussion, I'll move amendment 2.
Thank you, Chris. Is there a second for that?
Second.
Thank you, Ben. So amendment 2 is recommended. Now, within amendment 2, we're getting a proposal for an amendment from Jeff. Now, Jeff, do you want to put your proposal out there?
Yes, what I just said. So I propose we amend D1, and that significance can be demonstrated by meeting subsection E or 2 of the other 7 subsections.
All right, thank you. Any more discussion on that one?
Chair Spivak, I'll say one last thing, and that's that F on this list inherently would have to have met by the Park Service's estimation, A, B, C, or D. And so while F is there to avoid having to do the homework essentially again, F is essentially a catch-all for a property that the Park Service has already determined meets A, B, C, or D. I just put that out there.
So does that mean we should get rid of it, Brandon, if it doesn't add anything?
The thinking was not to require an applicant to make the case over again that they've met A, B, C, or D. I mean, essentially what we were trying to do with BDS was to come up with the not reinventing the wheel. You could get rid of F. You wouldn't have a downside other than if you have an applicant who's a property owner, they're looking to take advantage of seismic improvement incentives and a reuse incentive, and they're just trying to get it listed as a conservation landmark. To do that, the idea was let's make that a path of little resistance if it's owner initiated to take advantage of incentives. That was our staff thinking.
Can I just clarify one thing? Several people have said this applies to an individual property, which it does, but it does also apply to districts, proposals for districts. So I think there was some misperception that it only applies to individuals. It applies to districts as well. So I will, based on what you just said, Brandon, if it's okay, Eli, I would modify my amendment to get rid of subsection 5 to get rid of factor F. And then the rest of my proposed amendment, you demonstrate significance by meeting E or 2 of the what now would be remaining 6 factors.
And let me just clarify, when you take either your meeting E and then there were 6, and with removing F, there would be 5. So it's 2 of 5.
No, I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 7 there's 7 factors, A through G.
7.
We get rid of F. We now have 6 factors. Oh, you're right. I see what you're saying. So after we remove E, there'll be 5.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, let's get some.
If you
Someone
want,
have
you need
Robert's
someone needs to
second for that?
second Jeff's if you want to discuss
Is there
it.
a second for Jeff's proposal there.
I'll second.
Can I ask a clarifying question also? If we do this, is it all right if we move E to A in the final product? So it's not, so the wording in the beginning is more straightforward and clear.
Sounds like that's a friendly amendment. And I had a second. I couldn't see who the second came from.
Brianna, we got it.
Okay, thank you. All right, so discussion on the proposed amendment. I'm seeing Mike.
Yeah. I'd like Kristen's feedback on that one.
Thank you. Should I jump in?
So let's go to Kristen, and then if you want to jump in, and then Ben.
Okay. Thank you very much for asking for that. I still think there are better ways of getting at underrepresented community resources. And, you know, I get really concerned if we have to make a resource about both, you know, sort of a person and then also about architecture. I mean, these are not necessarily compatible, you know, sort of categories of significance. And so I'm worried that we're going to be missing some things by, you know, saying that you only, you know, you have to meet at least two as well as the underrepresented. You know, I just feel like it's not going to necessarily help property owners, you know, who are, you know, sometimes they are these low-income apartment buildings, you know, and they really have one path to try to get seismic, you know, upgrades, and that's to get designated and get those tax credits.
So is your concern having two versus one?
Correct.
Right. Okay. I share that.
Okay. Ben?
Yeah, very, very briefly, although I find Jeff's idea enticing, I just feel like we're raising the bar, and I'm kind of just going back to the original intent of this amendment, and in my mind was really kind of more consistency and in the application of the designation and the designation removal. So I feel like by piling it on, we're basically making it a lot more hard to achieve one way or another. So I'm in favor of what we got as originally proposed.
Thank you. Oriana?
Thanks for your perspective, Kristen. I think actually the example you gave of like affordable housing or housing that's benefiting low-income communities, based on my experience doing community work, that is very likely to qualify in terms of E, especially something that is historical from an affordable housing perspective. So I think that actually makes the case a little bit stronger and kind of strengthens my resolve on this. Because when I look through this list, if it's an or, it's associated with an event, associated with a person, associated with a style of architecture, those all, and I'm no expert in this by any means, so apologies and no offenses meant here, but those seem like achieving one is an easier bar in some respects. And when I think about the cost and effort that is involved in designating a resource, there's still so much privilege associated with understanding any of the above categories. And just in terms of how history is documented, who has ownership over history. I think sending a really strong signal through this that says we are valuing histories of communities who have not been well represented or not well documented, and creating a higher bar for those histories that have, is a really important step from a racial justice perspective. It's saying that we are creating this fast track for those histories that don't have all of the documentation. And I think it is actually likely making it easier for a community with an affordable housing unit who is wanting those seismic upgrades to really clearly see that fast track is happening. And I'll make one final point before getting off my soapbox. But I think because this doesn't only apply to single properties from a district perspective, we've talked a lot about Irvington, we've talked a lot about the potential of Selwood or other districts who are wanting to get that status. From an affordable housing stock perspective, you're making that neighborhood much harder to alter in certain respects. You're creating barriers. There should be a very high bar for doing that and creating that potential exclusivity, even with many of the other positive changes we're making here. But really valuing underrepresented communities over those alternative factors, I think, sends a really clear signal about what historic resources look like going forward, and that they're intended to look different than what historic resources have looked like in the past. Even if it means that we have fewer, that may not be a bad thing in the grand scheme of things. And again, no offense is meant by that. But I think, from a racial justice perspective, I feel very strongly here.
Thank you.
Commissioner McNair, could I ask you a clarifying question? And I guess it's one for Jeff too. I'm curious if there's a path here that differentiates landmarks from districts, like an individual property from a collection of properties, or if it's not something staff explored in this criterion, but we did explore it with the integrity criterion, thinking about individual landmarks differently than as a collection of buildings where you might have let's say, a more likely effect on developable property or displacement concerns rather than an owner who is looking to take advantage of a use incentive or that kind of thing. So I guess I'm curious if there's a difference from Jeff and maybe from you, Commissioner McNair, if there's a landmark districts both.
I'll go first. Two thoughts on that. Yes, I mean, I've thought throughout this code there should be more differentiation between landmarks and districts as a number of factors, because I think a lot of factors don't apply well to both there, but we haven't done that. So I'd be open to doing it here, but it opens the door to redoing it for other areas of the code. But I as often, my focus is always more on districts, and Oriana's comments are particularly relevant to districts. We should have a high bar to creating new historic districts. And just one other thing, Ben, I want to be sure I understood your comment. This does not apply to removing designations or changing designations. This is for new designations. So my proposal would not be lowering the bar. It would be keeping the bar where it is, or somewhere closer to where it is now, not making it easier for a new designation.
Well, it could. The way we've constructed the removal process is the removal process says you can be removed if you no longer meet the criteria for designation. And so if we move that bar for designation, it does, the way we've constructed the code, move the bar for proposals to remove.
Good
so
point.
Of the landmarks that exist today, if we move this bar here, existing landmark owner, Hollywood Theater, Pittock Mansion, et cetera, would have a different case to make for removal if we move the designation bar, just based on how we've constructed the two sides of the coin, designation and removal.
I'm going to go to Chris, and then I'm going to jump in myself, and then Kristen, and then Oriana. Chris.
So I'm looking for another path out of this. I very much agree with Oriana that we should be making it easier to include what have traditionally been underrepresented resources. So the question for staff, is there somewhere else in the code we could give an advantage to those underrepresented categories without having to raise the bar here for other properties or other resources?
The first thing that comes to mind, Commissioner Smith, is we have the way we've constructed the designation process is for significance, is something important and something meaningful. Then we go to integrity. Does it still have enough of its characteristics and its features or its experiential value that it still conveys a sense of the past and brings it to the present? And then we have this appropriate level of protection. And I wonder if in some ways what we're really talking about is a question of, yes, that may be important. Yes, it may still have some of its features. No, it's not the city's highest priority for protection. Therefore, we're not going to designate. In some ways, I think this is maybe what Chair Weiner is saying, I'm not sure. There may be a building or buildings that have a lot of architectural importance. People in the community may know the building as a physical landmark. It may still have its characteristics, but for one reason or another, it may not be appropriate to protect that as a historic resource. And my first thought, and maybe not be the right one, is as an alternative, could you strengthen this appropriate level of protection to really elevate the protection when requested and when appropriate of those histories that are underrepresented, and really ask the question for those histories that are overrepresented. Should we still keep protecting terracotta buildings downtown or Willamette River bridges or whatever it is? I don't know if that's right, but that's another way you might slice it.
Well, I'll jump in for a moment. I am intrigued by this amendment and also by the idea of splitting between landmarks and districts, because I am more sympathetic to the landmark properties. Districts is where the concern I would have is, and it does say at the beginning of this approval criteria is that whatever the review body is, it will be approved if the review body finds that the following approval criteria have been met. So even if the review body is the PSC, some future PSC will be looking at this with an application. Tell me if I'm getting this right, staff. And we will be looking to see whether it meets one or two of these items on the list. And we'll be bound by, if the case is made that it meets it, we'll have to approve. Is that correct?
That'd be true. In a quasi-judicial proceeding, that'd be correct. So if individual owner, I'm going to pick on Commissioner Ralph because I haven't heard much from Commissioner Ralph tonight. If Commissioner Ralph wants to designate their property because it has significant association with an important musician in Portland's history, and Commissioner Ralph is doing so because they're wanting to do multiple ADUs in the backyard and are willing to sign up for preservation protections, that application will be approved for designation if it meets the criteria. If the proposal is a legislative one to designate a new historic or conservation district, one of the reasons why the joint hearing is important is not only do you need to meet one of these or these criteria, which is where the Landmarks Commission's expertise may be valuable, you also need to demonstrate that it's better, equally or better meeting the comprehensive plan. And so the same burden as exists with other legislative projects would still be there. And so it's almost like where it's a typical project like this, you're just looking at the comprehensive plan for a proposal to designate a district in the future legislatively. You're looking at the comprehensive plan and these criteria, and both have to be met, as it were, to make a recommendation in favor to go to council.
Thank you. Kristen, and then Oriana.
Thank you. I wanted to say briefly in a reminder, and this is mostly for you, Oriana. I sense your disdain for historic districts, and so just in general, I want to remind you that historic districts have been, we've been sort of limited to that National Register criteria, right? And this code project is hoping, I think one of the things that we're hoping to be able to do is take another pass at preserving places that are, maybe can't meet that National Register criteria. And so in that way, we really are advancing more a racial justice lens in the first place, just by saying, we don't necessarily want to move forward with, the way things have been in the city of Portland. We have an opportunity to actually, look at communities that may not have the integrity, that have been impacted by past urban renewal, that there's not much left of them, but we have that responsibility. And so I think, this is really important work. And, I understand where you're coming from, but you really need to understand it's a complicated, you can't just sort of say, oh, this seems important now. I mean, if we had to look at individual properties, going back to the, affordable housing, even if something is now serving, a very low income population, that doesn't mean in the historic sense that it did. And so, we're making that case based on its historic, it has to be like 50 years ago. So I think, we miss some of these opportunities by not remembering things like that. And that's why I'm here to tell you, I guess. I think we want the same things, but, it's not as easy as you think it is.
Thank you. Oriana?
So since I'm next, I'm actually really curious, Kristen, and I have a few other points to make. If you could give me an example of one of those buildings that is affordable housing now, and whether it's regulated affordable housing or is serving community in a significant way that historically was not. Because just thinking about the history of redlining and how communities have been displaced, that would be surprising to me, at least in the Portland area and likely in other communities as well, but I could be wrong.
Almost all of our historic apartment buildings were built for a wealthier clientele. So, you know, one that comes to mind right now is the Wheeldon apartment building, which is right across from the Fox Tower on, what is that, Salmon? No, Taylor. So that was built for, you know, a pretty high-end clientele, actually. And they wanted to get on the National Register so that they could do the work that they needed to do for seismic upgrades. It's now an SRO and it's protected. I mean, you know, that's what a lot of the, you know, the CCC and Home Forward, you know, and groups like that, they, you know, they have people on their staff who specialize in understanding why it's important to get buildings like that on the National Register. It's so that they can, you know, use the tax credits.
So Brandon, will you scroll up? So I hear that in terms of some of the downtown buildings, and in particular CCC is, I think, a good example. So thank you for that, that elucidation, Kristen. I wonder if we don't adjust E, if we kind of take the route that Jeff and I are favoring, because I think the resource has significant association with at least one underrepresented community, cultural, or ethnic group, to me does not say only historically. And maybe that's just reading into the semantics here. But I think a couple of points. So in thinking about putting this in protection rather than in significance or integrity, that's not necessarily satisfying to me, because that's saying what is significant. And what we've valued as significant historically has been white supremacy. Revaluing underrepresented communities, and in particular Black and Indigenous communities, says those are significant, that we have not valued them in a way that is meaningful. And I can see protection being a way to approach that as well, but something about dealing it within protection rather than significance doesn't feel satisfying from a racial justice lens. And I'm not going to go on the soapbox about the history of exclusion in this state, and some of the other things that have really like forwarded white supremacy in Oregon's history, and that some of the people and some of the events that we are valuing here have potentially done harm to communities, whether we've meant it to or not. So I think seeing underrepresented communities in a list with that other history and just thinking about how complicated history is does not feel satisfying. To your question that you originally posed, Brendan, I think that I would be okay with having a slightly less stringent approach to individual buildings, hearing kind of Kat's comment about how hard it is to maintain, not wanting to harm individual homeowners, or an organization like CCC that has a building that maybe a body might not view as significant to a community now because it had that historic implication and residency that Kristen was talking about. But from a district perspective, I think we need to have a really high bar, just thinking about the way that districts have been used as a tool for exclusion. And we've heard the great stories of folks in Irvington and the diversity of ownership and experiences in those communities. But we've also had that displacement and that way that historic districts potentially are going to stay more single family in some respects than providing the multifamily housing that we need and creating more of the diversity. So I think districts have a weight to them that I would like to see. Either they really have historically benefited Black and Indigenous communities in particular, and we want to create preservation that allows for better right to return and better racial justice, or they have to meet a really high bar in order to achieve that level of protection. So I do feel very strongly about this, Kristen, because I think what I would hope you will understand better is just the history of white supremacy and how harmful that has been, and what history means to some communities is not the same as what it means to you or to me as white people.
Okay. I mean, I do this work too. You know, I believe me, I know.
I'm going to go to Steph, who has not spoken yet. And Chris, and you can let me know whether your hand's still up, Chris, or whether it's a new one.
Okay. It's interesting that to me that I thought if we were going to have any substantive conversation, it was going to be around integrity, because actually that's, if there's anything that speaks to me, it's the that we have undervalued, particularly places of significance to underrepresented communities, particularly cultural and racial, that integrity would have been degraded. And so I just want to note that my major tension is actually over number 2. And I don't know what to do with that. I really appreciate also the needing to differentiate between a landmark and a district, that those do have higher, like that a district just does have a much higher burden. And I appreciate like the idea of E being elevated. And I guess my question goes to, or my thoughts are hewing a little bit to how Chris is trying to translate a path, and that is an appropriateness that previously in the before times of different levels, it was on, or if it was off, it was a binary state of protection. And I just wonder, and we haven't, and part of it is like, we haven't tested this, right? That the appropriate level of protection is something new. So we don't know what those conversations and how those conversations would play out, whether that would elevate what is currently E to something that is prized and deemed significant above what would otherwise sail through one of the criteria. I'm still wrestling, but I'm wondering if the fact that we do have levels, and that appropriateness of level of protection, the fact that that is a future conversation, if that is an opportunity to elevate 1 over 2 criteria. I don't have an answer. I do just want to, before I go, because as Brandon mentioned, I haven't spoken much. I just want us to take a breath, because I heard that there was some specific characterization of how people, how people who are involved in this conversation are viewing this, and I would just love us to not characterize another person's standpoint of this. Sorry, Kristen. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. That's a great point. So we're trying to collaborate here to come up with the best recommendation we can. So we'll keep going with that spirit. I have a question for Jeff and Oriana, is whether I was intrigued by Chris's suggestion to see if there's another path towards this, but I didn't really hear one, at least making it up on the fly. So I guess I'm wondering whether it would be a friendly amendment to what's currently on the table, to basically split between landmarks and districts, and say that for a landmark property, someone would have to meet 1 of the items on the list, and item F, what's currently item F, would no longer be on the list. If it were going to be a district, they would have to meet 2 items on the list, unless it's a resource with significant association with at least one underrepresented community, cultural, or ethnic group. Currently, item E, we label that item A. So you either do 1 or 2 for a district, but for a property, you'd only have to pick 1 of them. So I guess the question is, for those who propose this amendment, would that be a friendly amendment?
I guess you're asking me to make a tactical decision. I prefer mine, but in the interest of getting a majority, I suspect I'll go along with your friendly amendment, Eli, unless Oriana, unless you think we should hold tight, ask for a vote, and then go to a friendly amendment.
So, Jeff, I'm actually a little less tactically focused in the moment and actually think that Eli's approach makes some sense based on some of the things we've heard. In particular, the affordable housing piece is convincing to me to just make sure that we don't create too much burden on an individual property owner. But I do think districts should have a high bar, and I think Eli is thread of the needle for me in a way that works.
Good. All right. Friendly amendment accepted.
So I'm going to ask if there's any further, should I, as I was reminded, we should make sure we know what we're voting on. Are there any more comments on this before I try and summarize what we're going to vote on?
Just I should withdraw my amendment. I'll withdraw my amendment. And why don't we just start afresh and go ahead and lay out your proposal, Eli? Okay.
I will try and articulate a new amendment to replace the one that's been withdrawn, which is to say that we would take the approval criteria section 1. We would strike from it what's currently letter F. Resources have been listed on the National Register of Historic Places. We would take what's currently item E and we would make that into item A. First on the list, resource has significant association with at least one underrepresented community, cultural, or ethnic group. If you were going to propose a landmark, you need to meet one of these items on the list. If you're proposing a district, you would either need to meet the letter A, which now is listed as E right now. Historic resource has a significant association with at least one underrepresented community, cultural, or ethnic group, or you need to meet 2 of the others to pass this threshold. Are there any questions on that? Does that characterize the proposal? I guess the question is there a second for that? That's my motion.
Second. I second.
Okay, thanks. Katie, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I'd like some feedback from staff if there's unintended consequences to that, and perhaps Kristen too. It sounded good to me, what you came up with, but
okay.
That's what it.
Staff unintended consequences. Good question.
So I think Commissioner Larcel, maybe I haven't had enough coffee today. I'm juggling between my multiple steno pads, my code, the amendment language, and the discussion. So it's good. I think we're going to think about this as we get towards council. It's a bigger substantive change. I'm in agreement with Commissioner McNair on something we've heard time and time again from the public in the last several years about the need to really call out the importance of communities and community groups and individuals who haven't historically been finding an open gate when it comes to historic designation. So that E was really important to staff. I think it's really important to elevate that. I think I've learned a lot in this discussion tonight, and I feel much more comfortable creating a higher bar with district designation because there'll be a joint hearing with the 2 commissions whenever a district is proposed for designation. And one of the reasons we did not pursue a quasi-judicial path to district designation and in these proposals, and it's continuing on with the recommendation, required a legislative procedure is that the whole comp plan needs to be brought to the table whenever we talk about creating a district. So in that way, as we've thought about district, it's a high bar, not just because of these approval criteria, but because this body in the future and the city council need to decide that that's the right thing to do as a community. So, I think that we've heard a lot from individual property owners, affordable housing developers, people who want to do interesting things with their property that need reuse flexibility. So I'm much more comfortable with an easier path for landmarks and districts on this whole conversation of designation.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion?
I want to clarify also when we said landmarks in this motion that's on the table, we're talking about both historic and conservation landmarks versus historic districts and conservation districts, correct?
And does Kristen have any input she wants to provide before we move on?
And I have Ben's hand up too. All right, so Ben, and then Kristen, if you want to jump in.
I just hate to put Kristen on the spot, but I'd be just interested in her opinion in this specific proposal where we kind of split it and we have an easier path for one and a higher bar for another.
Okay.
Okay, should I jump in? Thank you.
You're welcome to. Yeah, please do.
Okay. I think we could live with this. I mean, I definitely agree that, the path moving forward for any city listed historic district or conservation district is, the meeting of our two commissions. And that, I think, is, it's kind of a new day. We definitely have, there's this kind of integrity, knowledge, and significance stuff that we need to bring to bear on any new listing. But then having the whole sort of comp plan in the mix of discussion that you bring with your expertise, I think honestly this is probably a pretty decent path forward. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. So I think with that, let's have a vote on this. Kat's hands up. Kat.
Real quick question to staff or Kristen. And I'm reading through these trying to think of how do I combine two to get considered significant. The moment I seem to be able to work my way through it. But is there something that you could point to that would get denied or wouldn't hit the list of significance? And I know it's really putting you on the spot for quick thinking, but because we couldn't find two. And I mean, this is to the unintended consequences. I like where this discussion's gone, but I'm just like, geez, me not having enough knowledge about, I guess, what this could be denying as an opportunity, or, and thus therefore thinking about it in the lens of what do we have today. I just trying to tease that out.
So this would be in relation to districts, right? Because at this point,
yeah, exactly. So either stuff that hasn't been designated yet, but you've kind of thought, gosh, it'd be great if that was, and this puts the bar too high. Or if there was something today that you feel strongly should remain, that it basically kicks it out.
I guess I can answer that by saying that many districts currently, many historic districts, are listed for a couple of reasons. And often one of those reasons is architecture, right? So, it has served to give us listings that are made up of, those areas that, that didn't have to cope with urban renewal and, we're sort of the oldest areas in town, so I'm trying to think of those historic districts that don't have any real, that aren't representing cultural groups or, people of color. I think there certainly could be districts that wouldn't move forward. Under that, like I said, a lot of these categories don't easily overlap. There's not usually, except for the architecture one. That's the only one that often overlaps with others.
Well, so maybe I'm off, but my gut was likely everyone should be able to meet D. if it had a great historic past, it's going to continue to yield important information today and the future. Like that maybe I don't understand that enough, right? So I guess my first one is that I should probably be able to answer that one.
Yeah.
If that's my, I don't know if gimme's the right word, but okay, that's my first. So then the second one is whether it's architecture, I have to have a cultural or historical significance to the community, or I have to have a person, or
D is actually archaeological. So it's like, has to be sort of underground, which is, there's no historic districts really that have D.
Okay, so D's out.
Yeah. And
now it's gotten even harder for me. I guess now I'm like,
it's really
I could
hard
see.
Because then, so B, there's almost no historic districts that are sort of associated with one person, because that's, usually one person is associated with like a business or a house or something like that. So a historic district isn't going to really have B. So then it's A, which, certainly many historic districts that are important for their planning, like Laurelhurst, for instance, which really displays that very characteristic, planning from the streetcar era, and architecture. So that meets too. But what about like Grand Avenue Historic District? It probably meets, sort of early. I mean, it could meet A and C as well. I can't remember if that's what it's listed for. I mean, it's just, Brandon, jump in if you can think of any that would be kicked out, to meet Kat's question.
I guess I would assume there will be things that will be kicked out. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? Like we're trying to, in the friendly amendment, we wouldn't be having the conversation if we're not looking to narrow the opportunity for designation.
Right.
I think my initial thinking is that if for designation of a district, two of the following need to be met, it raises the bar on the proposal. The comp plan is always, this will be the body, this is the group that's going to consider that. So it's not as though it's going to be a decision that this body won't be intimately involved in. So you do a little bit, you're tying your own hands for the future for what this body would recommend to council, because it's districts, so it'll go legislatively. So it's a, essentially the decision tonight is if this amendment, then you and your future commissioners will be the ones to work with it. But I do have to agree with Commissioner Magnera that I think that we really should be seeing in districts, communities, cultural, individual groups, maybe it's emergent business communities, whatever, who haven't been represented. That really ought to be our focus and will likely be our focus. And for those areas that really are worthy of historic or conservation district status because of their design patterns or architecture, I think it would put the burden on staff and the community to really make the case that it's got multiple areas of the city's history that it tells. That the architecture alone isn't the only significant piece, that it's also significant with some broad pattern that's affected and improved or that we learn from as a state. So I think that the difference here between the base case and the amendment or the staff amendment and the friendly amendment on the table is it just raises the bar on the discussion of any future district designation with this body and the city council.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
All right. I'm going to clarify where we're at right now, I think. So we've got amendment on the table that I did my best to summarize, and I haven't heard questions on it, so I'll hope people understand that. And that is an amendment to amendment number 2. How about that? So let's first vote on the amendment that I described. And if that passes or if it doesn't pass, then we'll vote on amendment number 2. So first on the amendment that I just summarized, Julie, can you please call a roll call?
Sure. So just to confirm, this is Eli's move to take approval, section 1, strike what's currently F and move E to A. If it's a landmark, you need to meet one item. If it's a district, you would either need to meet what's the new A, currently E, or two of the others.
And we're going to strike from the list what's currently listed as F.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Backrack.
Yes.
Bortolazzo.
Yes.
Gittemeyer.
Yes.
Hauk.
Yes.
Larcell.
Yes.
Magnera.
Yes.
McWilliams.
Yes.
Routh.
Yes.
Schultz.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Spivak.
Yes. So that amendment carries. It is now boiled into what's listed by staff as amendment number 2. So would someone like to make a motion that staff amendment number 2 as amended is, someone like to make that motion?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I will second, Steph.
Thank you, Steph. Any further discussion on any other part of amendment number 2? If not, then I will ask for a roll call on that.
Okay. Backrack.
Yes.
Bortolazzo.
Yes.
Gittemeyer.
Yes.
Hauk.
Yes.
Larcell.
Yes.
Magnera.
Yes.
McWilliams.
Yes.
Routh.
Yes.
Sorry, Schultz.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Spivak.
Yes. So amendment number 2 passes. And I'll take a little breather for a second. Thank you, everyone, for going through this process.
Woo.
Woo. I like it when we are creative as a group, even remotely, and I can't wait to be creative as a group in person. So let's proceed now to number 3. Kristen, would you like to chime in?
Yes, and I'm so sorry I forgot to mention this. At the bottom of page 4, there's just one little wordsmithing item that I wanted to raise because I think we discussed this at the 3x3, and that is where it says, let's see, archaeological, cultural, historical, or architectural value of the resource and other conflicting values. I remember discussing that that language should really say conflicting or supporting values. Because you know there are both, you know, that I think we're drawing from the comp plan. So does anyone, you know, share that memory of talking about that language with me? Yeah.
Chair Minor, as staff, I do remember us having that conversation. We, at the staff level, I think landed on the least amount of change to achieve the spirit of the requested amendment, but that's the extent of, as I'm pulling from my memory, what I remember.
And I have to say, I don't remember. I'm sorry, Kristen, the conversation. So I certainly wasn't, I mean, it doesn't look like we had a commissioner that brought this forward. Planning commissioner.
All right. Well, thanks. So yeah, so if we have someone who was in the group rings a bell and wants to amend this in, then you got the whole meeting to do it. I think that for now, let's go on to number 3.
Great. Thanks, Chair Spivak. Amendment 3 would make a modest change to one of the thresholds that define demolition in the chapter. The change is intended to allow the what we call the demolition review bypass to work more effectively, so that if an applicant is removing a 50% of one of the street-facing walls, they would either be subject to demolition review or, at their discretion, historic resource review. We did a calculation of how many proposals annually this might affect given recent trends, and what we came up with are one or fewer every 5 years. So it's a pretty modest change, but one that was informed by those 2 cases that we thought would be most successful by making this change. So we think it has a pretty small effect, but let's say we'll catch a few, a rare situation that ought to be subject to a review.
Thank you. And Ben, does this capture with what you were going for on this, or like making more comments on it?
Yes, I'm pretty happy with the proposal that met. I think it's the outcome of the 3x3 discussion. So yes.
Okay. Thank you. Would anyone like to make a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mike. Second?
I'll second that, Katie.
I'm hearing Katie is a second.
Yeah.
Okay, discussion on item 3. Not hearing that. Staff, can you please call Julie? A vote.
Yes. Backrack.
Yes.
Bortolazzo.
Yes.
Gettemeyer.
Yes.
Hauk.
Yes.
Larcel.
Yes.
Nagnera.
Yes.
McWilliams.
Yes.
Routh.
Yes.
Schultz.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Spivak.
Yes, motion carries unanimously. Okay, item number 4.
Great. Thank you, Chair Spivak. So item 4 is a little bit complicated. I'll be succinct since I know what time it is. Item 4 is a pretty major change both to the current situation and to the proposed draft. Item 4 would retain demolition review for contributing structures associated with or detached accessory structures that are identified as contributing to the historic significance of a landmark. This would be like the gatehouse at the Pittock Mansion or an associated landscape feature associated with landmarks. But in districts, Historic Conservation and National Register would exempt detached accessory structures that are covered and no larger than 800 square feet from demolition review. So that would be in all of our Historic Conservation National Register districts where we see covered detached structures primarily. This would be Laurelhurst, Ladd's Addition, and Irvington. That's the bulk of them. And then just as a reminder, any structure that's not identified as contributing, so not from the historic period, wasn't identified in the documentation, that is not subject to demolition review. It's already exempt. So this would mean if you're in Irvington, I think every detached accessory structure in Irvington would be exempt from demolition review.
Okay, thanks for the summary. Got a hand up from Jeff.
I've got 2 issues, but that's, well, let me first ask a question. In looking at the code sections that are proposed to be deleted and amended, that's what they're doing, Brandon? They are saying non-contributing accessory structures are exempt from review. Is that the outcome? Because I thought that's what we agreed to.
So non-contributing accessory structures already exempt in the proposed draft. That would stay. Contributing accessory structures would be exempt if they're A, in the district, and B, covered and no larger than 800 square feet. So then you add in those additional contributing accessory structures into the exemption.
Okay, thank you. And I realize my concerns have to do with Amendment 5, so I'm good to go.
All right, would anyone like to make a motion on Amendment 4?
I move Amendment 4.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Kat. Discussion on number 4? All right, let's call a vote. Julie?
Backrack.
Yes.
Bortolazzo.
Yes.
Gettemeyer.
Yes.
Hauk.
Yep.
Larcel.
Yes.
Nagnera.
Yes.
McWilliams. Routh.
Yes.
Schultz.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Spivak.
Yes. Motion passes with all voting supporting and 1 abstention. Or perhaps not intended. Let's keep moving to number 5.
Number 5, we kind of got our hands into the demolition review approval criteria and supplemental application requirements. We had several issues that were raised related to demolition review, and we clustered them in Amendment 5. Amendment 5 would do a couple of things. 1, it would remove the requirement for supplemental application materials for most of the demolition review approval criteria. 2, it would satisfy statewide land use goal 5 regulations by adding factors where necessary to the approval criteria. And then 4th, what it would do, or 3rd, what it would do is it would retain the supplemental application requirements only for proposals that are seeking demolition based on economic hardship. And those application requirements generally exist today. We did do some small fine tuning to those. We removed a couple. And then the last thing, big one, and maybe this will be in discussion, is you all probably remember we had quite a bit of testimony back in the fall related to a proposed approval criterion that was directly tied to affordable housing. Much of that testimony was seeking clarity on what staff intended by affordable housing. And what we've proposed in Amendment 5 is to define affordable housing as the 60% MFI level. So that if you're proposing to demolish a structure in a residential zone in a National Register district, and the proposed replacement would include more housing at the 60% MFI level than could result from preservation, that's an application for demolition that'd be approved. We don't expect that would happen all that often, but we were looking for alignment with where we're going with residential infill project and trying to do some of the balancing of comp plan goals ahead of time, thinking about the level of protection at the National Register level and the types of resources we might see there. So there's kind of a lot in this one. And I know Jeff has a comment, others may as well, so I'll stop there.
All right, thank you. Jeff.
Thank you. Yeah, the first one is the supplemental application requirements. And I know this is something both Chair Spivak and I drew attention to. So this is subsection 846080C, and it lists all the things that an applicant must demonstrate. And I guess my concern is, I guess, unless there's something in Goal 5 that requires each of those pieces of evidence, I would rather have them just be factors that an applicant should consider providing. Some of them may not be relevant, some of them may not be attainable, and ultimately the decision maker will decide whether the evidence is good enough. So I'm uncomfortable with mandating here is each piece of evidence you must apply. You know the standard. The standard is you have to address the feasible or reasonable economic use of the property. It seems to me the applicant should be able to make the case the best way the applicant thinks he can make that case and not be told you shall provide each of these pieces of evidence. I'm fine leaving them there as suggested information that would be helpful to the decision maker, but leave it up to the applicant. And the second part of that is 1 and 2 require information from licensed engineers or architects, experience in et cetera, et cetera. And the second one, again, is requiring a certain kind of evidence. I don't think you see this elsewhere in the code where you prescribe the type of expert that must provide evidence and you describe exactly what the expert must show you. Again, I'd like to see all 8 of those rewritten, not to make them mandatory, but rather to say, here's the kind of evidence that would be helpful in proving you meet the criteria.
Thank you.
You want me to stop there, Eli, or go on to my second issue? Why don't I stop there?
We'll stop there, yeah. Oriana, are you speaking to that item or a different one?
I am speaking to the definition of deeply affordable. So happy to hold. We'll have a question for Brandon at some point.
Great. Well, Brandon, do you want to talk to Jeff's comment on C?
I do. And Jeff, this is one of those issues that were raised, and after giving it the review, we found that moving away from application requirements to factors for the other approval criteria made sense. And I think that was one of those misses on staff's part that we could have done it better. And when we look at how we've constructed the approval criteria with factors for everything other than D1, staff feel better about that than the proposed draft. I think with this one, we didn't relitigate, or we didn't rethink the city council's position in 2005 when they developed this list of application requirements that were necessary to demonstrate economic hardship. You're right. This is a rare long list in the code for for the specific to historic resources about how to demonstrate that there's effectively a taking. And I guess I should just say that this list exists today, and it is tied to that approval criterion. And so we at the staff level thought well, that's been in the books for over a decade, 15 years, our best path may be to leave it and not relitigate what was done in 2005. Now, the current application requirements exist in different chapters. We brought those two together and we've done some minor culling, but that was generally the thinking, was that's what the council found in 2005 that was necessary to make the case for economic hardship. So we'll stay the course.
So this is not new language, even though it's underlined as new language. It's in the existing code.
It is in the existing code. We've moved it from chapter 445 to 846. So it'd be next to, the more appropriately next to the approval criteria. There are a few small changes. We changed, things like the property to the resource, or a few things here and there to make it more consistent.
I still don't like it, but since it's in the existing code, I'll drop my concern with it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jeff, do you want to go to your next item?
Yeah, I have one other, which is approval criteria. This is 846080D2. And let me get my, okay. This is something I think our subgroup all agreed on, which was that the existing D2 in the code should be put back in. And Brandon, what you've put back in is a somewhat modified version of existing D2. And I guess I'd like to stick with what our subcommittee unanimously agreed to, all of us, Kristen included, that the existing D2 is good. It works, it's clear. And so I don't want to see a modified version of D2. I thought, someone correct me if I'm wrong, we agreed as a subcommittee to go back to D2. So my proposal is to take out the proposed D2 and replace it with what's already in the code as D2. It's actually in the code as C2, but so.
One thing, Jeff, is an interesting volley back and forth. Originally, when we talked about this issue, staff were concerned about language that was brought forward that would use the phrase equally or more supportive of the comprehensive plan. And then upon reconsideration, when we looked at the comprehensive plan, we looked at other approval criteria, returned back to the phrasing equally or more supportive as being most consistent with the language in the new comprehensive plan, and landed back where you had proposed we started. And then I think the 3x3 wanted to return us to the original version, but we were stuck on what we ultimately decided at the staff level was most consistent with the comprehensive plan would be that equally or more supportive language. The other reason we added relevant goals and policies here is that what we didn't want was for an applicant or the decision maker to need to look at every comprehensive plan policy and making their decision, that we thought that the opportunity of being specific, that we're just talking about what's relevant. If the proposal is to demolish a landmark and replace it with affordable housing, let's not do the exercise of looking at every policy in the comprehensive plan. And so that was some of the thinking. The last thing I'll say is what you'll see in 2 in the factors. We have added A and B to bring in required factors from goal 5. And so at the staff level, we would feel pretty strongly that A and B stick around. We've also proposed a deletion of existing C and D, since the phrase area's desired character was leaving us a little bit scratching our heads as to if that's the appropriate wording for what should be considered.
I appreciate all that. I realize existing 2 has got its own set of problems. I guess my problem is we came to a consensus on this issue, and then I understand staff took it upon himself to change it, and I just haven't had time to really think through the change. I'm not sure it accurately reflects the committee's desire on this one, so I'm not sure what to do if we're not going to finish.
Jeff, I feel like the direction we got from the 3x3 and Kat and Steph.
I'll go ahead and finish, Sandra. That's okay.
Oh, sorry.
If we're not going to finish tonight, then I'd like to maybe pull this one and come back to it. If we are going to finish tonight, which doesn't look likely, I'd like to. Well, then I'm not sure what my response would be, but I guess that's my first question. If we're not going to finish tonight, I'd like to pull this one.
I don't know the answer to that question yet. Yeah, not knowing it, I'm going to see if Ariana would like to share an item on the affordability piece.
Yeah, it's a question for Brandon, which is just how did you decide on 60% of MFI versus some of the other measures of poverty, and in particular 60% versus say 80%, which is more common for a lot of programs in the state? No beef here, but just very curious to understand the reasoning, because this is pretty like significant in terms of like how affordable this housing has to be, which is potentially good.
Absolutely. What we were looking at is the recently adopted residential infill project affordability requirements. Since these are single dwelling zones, we were looking for as a most likely scenario. You know, what would be most likely, and really thinking about the broad benefit. You know, for taking down a historic resource, even though it's in a district, National Register, what we would want as a decision maker really to be looking at a demonstrable public benefit. Not that 80 wouldn't be, but that's where we set that line.
And can you remind me with residential infill, is it straight 60 or is it 60 rental, 80 ownership?
Can I ask one of my colleagues to remind me?
So it's 60 in the code, and it's in the title Title 30 rules. That's where the 80% for ownership comes in. The ownership rates are in Title 30.
Okay, so I don't quite understand. So is this just say it has to be affordable, and then you have to go to a different title to find out which level of affordability depending on tenure?
The 60% affordability is in the zoning code for both inclusionary housing, better housing by designs, 60% MFI bonus, and residential infill.
Okay, but 80% comes in as an alternate path I'm trying to understand that piece of it.
Yeah, the zoning code is only specifies the 60%, and Title 30 gives you the two different rates for ownership. I don't know off the top of my head exactly what the ownership rates are at the different levels, the 60, the 80, because there's multiple different levels in the zoning code in terms of which affordable housing standard we're talking about. But for ownership, that's all in the Title 30, those rates.
Okay. Okay, let's go to, I'm not totally following it, but I'm going to move us along to Katie and then Valeria.
Yeah, I just wanted to know about that 60% too, not the 60 or the 80, but what's to guarantee that it stays that for a while? Is there is that somewhere else in the code, or is that somewhere else? Because I have friends that have gotten into those programs, and sometimes they feel a little gamed by the owners. They'll keep raising the rents just exactly how much they're allowed to, and the next thing you know, they can't even afford the place anymore. So I'm a little leery about these that are just sort of stated, and then there's not a definition around it. Is that definition somewhere else that it's referring to, or?
Yeah, the thinking here on this criterion, which is a new one, is that we'd be piggybacking on the recent decisions on the residential infill project. And so if you're looking for approval on criterion D4, you're also, by logical extension, using the residential infill project bonuses that have a similar expectation. And so what we really wanted to do was to continue the policy approach that was in residential infill project by extending it to National Register single dwelling zone districts. Part of why we didn't apply this in a more broad spectrum of the residential zones was that we really wanted to connect with that residential infill project affordability bonus.
Okay, so are you saying that then it is actually connected to that enough so that there wouldn't be a gaming? What I'm afraid of is somebody putting in something and then using that maybe for a year or two, and then turning it into a romper room later on, or you know what I mean? It's like if they're getting the advantage of the demolition, they should be giving us something that lasts for, I would think, at least 10 years, if not 20.
I'm going to jump in for just a second. It says permanently affordable in the description of the text.
Oh, it does? Okay, that's what.
My understanding is that there would be a covenant recorded against the property, ensuring that with the city's enforcement on, that it actually has income qualified tenants.
And that is a very long time, so I'm very happy about that. Thanks for putting that.
Let's go to Valeria.
Yeah, I was gonna ask the same question as Katie brought up, but I was just gonna make a note that I appreciate that this specifically is trying to provide affordability for 60% of the area median income, but my hope is that right now, the majority of housing is needed at a more of the 30% of the area median family income. And my hope is that potentially the 60% units can help support 30% AMI units in these projects. I think it's extremely easy to make projects at 60%. And so I just wanted to make a note that the biggest need to support housing needs, but also to prevent people from being homeless, it's at the 30%. So I'm just hoping that the projects that do come forward provide that unit mix that's needed in the community. So.
Commissioner McWilliams' point, one of the beauties of the Swiss Army knife that is criterion D2 is for a proposal that came in another zone that might be providing a range of housing choice. It might be 30%, 80%, 120%. When you bring the comprehensive plan to the table, it lets the decision maker weigh how important is the historic resource, what's being proposed, what does the community need, in a way that's a little more, well, quite a bit more flexible and complicated than criterion D4. It's why we kept D4 limited to the single dwelling zones, because we thought about the magnitude and the scale of A, the change, and B, the proposed replacement structure.
Thank you for that context.
Okay, Ben.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide a little bit more context on this. So real quick, the previous text code had just affordable housing. They were really defining what that was. So that's something I picked up from testimony on affordable housing providers. And that's typically the 60% that's typically where regulated affordable housing starts from. And I agree there's, different levels of affordability, but 60 is kind of the standard that PHP uses, so I think it makes sense.
Okay. Any other discussion items on this batch of amendments? I'll call it number 5. I want to go back to one item Jeff said at the beginning on the criteria for the application requirements for demolition review. I similarly wish that I think this list is onerous and too prescriptive. I'm not inclined to try and amend it because it requires a fair amount of work on the fly here, and City Council has seen it before. But this is the sort of thing that I think we could put into a letter to City Council to try and encourage them to rethink how prescriptive this is. So anyway, I just wanted to throw my support behind that concept. But I do understand from staff that at the director's discretion, they can drop things from this list and say you don't have to submit that to have a complete application. So I think there's sort of a workaround, even with the current language. Other discussion items for this amendment? Jeff, is that a new hand? Looks like maybe not. Okay.
Nope.
And I don't have the answer to the question of what we're going to get done today. So I guess, are there any amendments suggested to amendment number 5?
Nope.
Okay, I'm not seeing any. So then that has been proposed and seconded. So I think we can vote on number 5.
If I might maybe share my recollection of the conversation that we had at the 3x3, the criteria says demolition of resources that were evaluated against, and on balance, demolition has been found to be equally or more supportive of the relevant goals and policies of the comp plan. My recollection is that the 3x3 said, we're not trying to invent a new way of using the comprehensive plan and how those goals and policies get balanced. We want to use it the same way that we use those goals and policies in legislative projects. So we went back to the comp plan and took a look at the very front of the comp plan in the introduction, where the section is how is a comprehensive plan policies weighed and balanced in decision making? And it uses the terms equally or more supportive of the existing comp plan as a whole. And so that's why we went with the approach of using that same language in this criteria. So we're not using the comp plan in a different way. That was my recollection, Jeff. I'm sorry you don't feel like it reflects that conversation. But
I'm sorry, because I guess what I'm bothered by is you're right. We had this discussion and we didn't perhaps give explicit language for what we wanted. And what I'm reading now, I don't think is quite consistent with the general direction we offered. So I didn't mean to suggest we said do X and you didn't do X. I think we voiced some directions, and in reading the code language you came up with, I'm just not sure it captures where we were at. And so I'm going to vote against this amendment now because I just haven't had a chance to read it, think through, and I'm not sure it fits. So if we have time, I would offer some specific suggestions. If we don't have time, if we actually do finish tonight, then so be it. I'll just be no on this particular amendment. But more importantly, I guess we're at 6:52, so I'm not sure what we're going to.
Yeah, maybe we're not. Kat, that's a good point.
I was just going to say, having been on this subcommittee, I am supportive of staff's language for D2 as written and on the screen right now.
Okay.
And just to be clear, it's D2. Well, never mind. Yeah, it's essentially D2. Okay, thanks, Ken.
Okay, Steph?
Just same. I'm comfortable with the language.
Okay. Okay, I think we are going to go for a vote on this one.
Hey, Eli, I might have missed it, but I don't think anyone has actually moved this amendment yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. There was someone like to make a motion to move amendment number 5.
So move.
Steph seconds.
I got Mike making it and Steph seconding it. And
Thank
let's
you.
call for vote on number 5. Thanks.
Okay, Backrack.
No.
Bortolazzo.
Yes.
Gidemeyer.
yes.
Sorry, Hauk.
Yep.
Larcell.
Yes.
Magnera.
Yes.
Nick Williams.
Yes.
Routh.
Yes.
Schultz.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Spivak.
Yes, motion passes with 1 opposed and the rest in favor. And let's go to the next item and I'll confer about next steps. So number 6.
Great. Number 6 is a change that many commissioners raised, which would allow solar installations in historic districts without historic resource review, provided that certain standards are met. We did take a look at the proposed draft code and listened to the discussion at PSC numerous times, and ended up doing a couple things. 1, requiring the solar panels to be tied up against the roofs, and 2, eliminating a requirement for certain roof material types for the installation to occur on. Also, to find parity with what we have in the code today, what we've long done and what was in the proposed draft, we've also included skylights along with solar panels to take the same approach to skylights and solar panels as we've done to date in other places for a long time with the code. And so we just wanted to find the same path with skylights and solar panels.
Thank you. Oriana?
So I have a few questions on this particular amendment and why certain choices were made. If you don't mind entertaining them, and I'll try to make it quick because I know we're short on time. The first is, how did you weigh kind of the preserving the historic quality of a building against the potential capacity or generation? Some of these limitations here might mean that you have a slightly smaller system or a system that doesn't have as much capacity to produce the energy. So from a climate goals perspective, may not meet the climate goals as efficiently. That's not a problem, but just curious how that was weighed. And Brandon, would you prefer to kind of go question by question or hear all three at once?
Question by question, if that works.
Okay.
So on this one, what we did is we looked at sort of the magnitude of the change over the current case. Currently in historic districts, solar installations that are not facing the rear property line do require historic resource review. We see very few of those applications. Moving to an exemption on all roof slopes is a significant change from the base case and a significant change from the proposed draft case. And so I would say to the commissioner, we didn't do an evaluation of sort of energy performance and different modeling. What we did do is confer with our colleagues at the Bureau of Development Services, who tell us that the most typical installations they're seeing are 6 to 8 inches off of the roof and parallel to the roof slope. There are other conditions out there, but they're telling us that the most typical single family type installation is tied against the roof, parallel, and a panel. But we didn't do any energy modeling to get a sense as to what other alternatives are out there, other than recognizing we're sort of moving the needle a ways, and that because we're moving that needle in the exemption, if an applicant wants to do something different, they can apply for historic resource review. And now with the exemption, if it moves forward, would have a stronger case to do something that differs from that.
Okay. I want to interject for one second. I want to just time checking. I'm wondering whether commissioners can stay till 7:30. We do the best we can to wrap up this item. And we have one other agenda item, which maybe we could give 20 minutes to, but we would push the remaining discussion on historic landmarks until our next meeting on May 4th. So I guess the question is, does anyone have a conflict that would prevent them from going till 7:30? Can we do that?
I need to go.
I need to go? Okay.
Chair Spivak, this is Kristen, and I also, I think I need to leave at about 7, unfortunately.
Okay.
And a little bit, we're probably also after amendment number 6. I think amendment number 7 is going to take quite a bit of discussion, and I don't think we can do that in 20 minutes.
No, when I said never 20 minutes, I talked about PSC listening sessions. We would end historic resources very shortly.
Oh, I see.
We'd wrap that last agenda item up and then pick up historic resources with number 7
at our next meeting.
4th. I think that from not hearing a lot of voices, I think that probably works. So I'm gonna let's go back to the solar discussion. Kristen, jump in if you have topic items on that one, and then we'll be picking this back up again at our next meeting. So Oriana, next question.
The second question is about storage systems and how that might fit in if you have like an exterior container for a battery. A lot of solar designs will put the storage in like an electrical room if it's a larger building, or kind of by your electrical box. But there may be some designs that would require like a metal exterior casing for a battery. Was that weighed, and how would that be addressed in this particular amendment?
Yeah, that's a great question, Commissioner McNair. We did not weigh that. We do have new exemptions for conduit, meters. I'll take a look here in a minute. So we have some exemptions. If we're going to continue beyond tonight, we could look at whether or not those proposed exemptions would capture the typical case for external battery storage.
Right. I would like to have that conversation. Happy to have that with you. I might also loop in Vin Mason from the sustainability side of things, who's the buildings person for the sustainability team. Also, a question to bring to maybe a conversation between the three of us would be whether we could amend the skylight portion to include some measure of energy efficiency. It's interesting to include skylights and solar panels together because skylights can impact the energy efficiency of a home and thus how it interacts with the climate action plan. If they're not installed correctly or they don't have energy efficient properties. I know we've already had the conversation around windows and vinyl windows versus windows that maintain the historic integrity of a home, and I don't want to re-raise that. But if we are kind of consistently going to treat skylights like solar panels, then I would encourage us to work with Vin to make sure that we treat skylights in a way that doesn't allow for less energy efficiency, which is kind of counteractive to what you're trying to do with the solar panels here in my mind.
All right, thank you. I had that same question. And Van, do you want to give the same answer?
Yeah, I think with the skylights, again, we were just looking at from a consistency approach, since we've had solar and skylights together, not thinking about energy efficiency, thinking about when historic resource review should and should not be required. We elevated skylights along with solar panels as an exemption. It was in, I think, Commissioner Bortolazzo's issue list, and so we built off of that. I as staff wouldn't have any heartburn at all if we just remove the skylights exemption. Like if, I think Commissioner Magnero would, whatever level of discussion you would want to have. Honestly, it was a stay the course with what we've done in the past. We don't have any public testimony on skylights asking for that amendment. So we could either look to tighten up the parameters of the exemption or remove it altogether. I think I'm agnostic.
I would want to consult with the sustainability team on that. This goes kind of beyond my depth of knowledge here, beyond just raising the question. So let's chat with them and see what their recommendation is. Skylights can have some benefits, especially in like a passive house design. So we may want to keep this in, but put the right parameters around so that you're not kind of avoiding the climate benefits that we're trying to achieve.
Okay. Ben?
Yeah, I'd actually be interested in exploring the skylight idea a little bit further myself. I mean, I raised the solar panel question, but I think it would add, probably welcome flexibility for attic use, additional space, and those type of things. So not only from a energy efficiency standpoint, but also from allowing more flexibility to use all the space in an historic building.
Thank you. That's a good point. I'm going to toss out one more item on this topic is, which I brought up to staff, is that I think that in conservation districts, as currently the amendment language currently stands, there's not an exemption for flat roof situations where we put solar panels on at an angle. And that's kind of an unintended omission. So I would want to amend in so we get the same flat roof exception we have in historic districts, would also apply to conservation districts. So I think that's probably for staff's perspective, a friendly amendment. The idea is if you do have a flat roof building in a conservation district, you should be able to put slope panels going up no more than 5 feet, just like you can in a historic district. Any other discussion items for this? Okay, so I'm hearing that we've got some potential, I think this might be a good chance to see if staff wants to look a little more on the skylight question with Vin to see if there's reaching home efficiency, balancing home efficiency, if that might go into the code. If that's the only item I'm hearing that's sort of pending from Amendment Package 6. Does anyone have an objection to just since we're not going to be voting on this whole package today, asking staff to look at that? And then we pick this up again with item 7 at our May 4th meeting. Yeah.
Does it help staff or do any good to just vote on this without the skylights and then at least move forward on the solar panels and let staff research the skylight issue? I'm just thinking in case for some reason they can't get to the sustainability group in time to for our decision, at least this piece moves on. They can always take that to council and we could maybe hear before it goes to council how we could weigh in on it.
I would say two things. One, I think we got a pretty tight turnaround. I also have from Commissioner Magnero the external battery question related to skylights. And so I think I defer to the chair if you'd want to, take skylights out now and then we can come back next week and revisit skylights and external battery after we've had that conversation with Commissioner Magnero and our other staff, or be leave it open and we'll come back next time and start with this.
Okay. What is our timeline for council? I mean, it seems like we're going to have 7 through 14 to handle. If we address those in our May 4th meeting, or are we still going to be able to hit the council date?
We don't have a council date. We're just getting there with DOZA. So we're waiting for DOZA to clear the path, and then we'll be there later, probably the fall. We still have to write all of our findings against the comp plan.
Okay.
So there's no rush.
Okay. Well, taking that advice, I'm going to say let's pick it up. Let's continue this discussion until May 4th, where we'll pick it up with item number 6, and then go through the end of the list at that point. So I think with that, I will say thank you, everyone, for the discussion on historic resources. We are not going to be wrapping up this meeting, but we'll wrap it up next time. And if people have items in the amendment list that you would like to have some wordsmith assistance with ahead of the meeting, then please don't hesitate to contact staff so that we can have that in front of us when we go through the items, and maybe even ahead of time at the meeting. And that'll help us work through the rest of the list. So with that, thank you so much, Sandra and team. And I think that we will move on to our last agenda item for this meeting. Screen share. So this is it's kind of a new topic, and I will briefly introduce. We've discussed at various times in the PSC about having opportunities to learn ourselves and bring up topics that don't come to us through the legislative process or staff suggested briefings. And one way to do that is, so since this has not happened in the past 10 years of this commission, it's a little bit of an inventive project. But one way we've drafted it up for us would be to hold either called listening session or a panel discussion. And I want to sort of describe what that might look like. And we already have sort of an idea for a first test balloon case of that, but wanted to see what people, if people have other ideas for topics as well. So the idea would be that we come up with some topic, and the topic that's been brought up so far, I was using an example, is housing production in Portland, and how that has apparently dropped off significantly recently. And people are tossing around a lot of explanations for it, but it's something that is definitely within the PSC's purview, our interest area. And it would elevate an issue, provide some education to us and to the public. And we may or may not come away with follow-up ideas from the project, but a way to bring us up to speed on current events that might not be part of like a legislative process. Structured-wise, staff is really scarce on resources right now. So if we do this, it's going to take some of our own leadership to pull it off. So that means PSC members, a few people stepping up as a little team to frame the discussion, figure out who we'd want to invite to present and field questions, and obviously get a wide range of perspectives on that, and to facilitate it. Need not be me doing that. And the caveats are that, you know, we only have so much time in our schedules. We have a lot of things we have to do for legislative purposes, and some key briefings we need to hear, but there are slots that come up sometimes. And this will be an experiment. We haven't done it before. We can try it out. We can learn from one lesson and try looking ahead. So the first thing I wanted to check in on is whether on the housing topic, there are people, anyone who'd be willing to be part of a little group that would, outside a meeting, brainstorm who might be helpful to frame the issue a little bit better, who would be good to invite, if there's any materials that would be good to share with fellow commissioners ahead of a panel, bring those up. We'd run the list of panelists past staff first, just so they can just make sure we're not missing somebody or there's not some dicey political thing. I'm not sure what it would be, but give staff a heads up. Then we'd invite folks and they would come and we'd have I don't know, maybe an hour and a half or something like that out of a meeting to listen to panelists, be able to answer them, ask them questions, have a discussion with them on a topic of our choosing. So I guess first off, I will see for the housing, which is the topic we've brought up already, is there anybody who would be willing to be part of like a group to help sort that out? I'm seeing, oh goodness, great. So this is awesome. In the past, I've had a really hard time writing down all the names. So keep your hand, your one or both hands up. So we're not gonna really get all of you, so we might have to deal with some attrition. So I've got Ben, Jesse, Oriana, Jeff, Valeria, That's who I have. Okay, well, that's not a quorum, so that's great. Thank you, everyone. And then this is awesome. And then the other item is other ideas of topics. So these are things that are clearly, I think our topic range, obviously we have massively broad interest as a commission. So are there other items that you think might work well with this format that might not come to us some other way that we might want to delve into? Steph.
Sweet. I mean, I think going on the thread of thanks to everyone who raised their hands. I was just like, my hand couldn't be more down. I appreciate you. Following on the thread of our letter to Director Warner from Bureau of Transportation, looking at the scope of scoping for the transportation system plan, and also, looking at some large capital projects, and I'm thinking specifically of, I-5 and how that impacts our climate goals. So I wonder if, having a conversation around, more substantive conversation about how transportation fits within our purview at the PSC would be an interesting conversation. Thank you.
Great. And this can just be like popcorn. So just toss a bunch of ideas out there, and it'd be exciting to see what resonates. Let's see, Oriana, and then. Oh, were you raising your hand and not able, Katie?
I did raise my hand, but just with my hand, I didn't.
Okay, I'll take the hand raised there, and then we'll go to Oriana and Valeria.
Well, a couple things. I am still would like to know more about residential infill RIP in terms of where it's going to happen, and rather than, I mean, I don't even know if this fits us anymore because we've already ruled on it, but just how it's going to show up in East Portland. To me, that's the only place where it's going to really happen, and I don't know how it's going to happen. So that's a topic I'm interested in anyway. And then the other thing, which is not necessarily, it might even be a training, but when we were considering inclusionary housing, there was a lot of discussion about how the model that developers use to decide when they were going to build or not, which kind of grades into the RIP thing a little bit. And we were often told that, we modeled that and no one would build that way. No one will build that. You have to have this price point or whatever up here. That I would love to get trained more on what that model is and how sensitive it is on the different pieces, if that makes any sense, what I'm saying to other people. But it's hard to argue against. You might have values around what you would like to see, and then you hear from someone that it just doesn't pencil out. So it'd be nice to understand what that penciling was about, so that you could either say, well, yeah, I think it might pencil out, but you can't really do that if you don't understand it.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And I should say that with any of these panels, and maybe the housing production is one of them, I hope that the team will send out a note, just the PSC members, to say, okay, who does the rest of the PSC think should participate, and what do we want to learn from it? So that if there's a particular item like that, you can say, yeah, somehow through this process, I want to learn how the numbers work on these deals. Oriana and then Valeria.
I've got a few, so I think maybe I'll just drop them in an email for the interest of time, and the officers can talk about and give a little bit more space for Valeria, since I've talked a lot today.
Okay.
I would love to have a panel discussion on how sustainability can advance racial equity in affordable housing. Specifically, there is a Metro Housing Bond project that we just approved. It's called Albertina Kerr. And it's, when completed, it's going to be the largest net zero energy affordable housing project in the Pacific Northwest. And that highlights just a huge benefit to future residents because they won't have to pay any utilities, which can cause a burden in overall like rent burden that people experience. And so I would love to know like what are, well, first, like if current code sort of supports projects like that, and just like what else is out there in the intersection of sustainability that we can highlight and just keep in mind when it comes to affordable housing. So and I'm happy to send a link to this project and information about it. It's also workforce housing, so it's just an overall really, really great project. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts? So, Julie, can you be the person who receives these emails and just sort of bundle them into a list?
Yep, that's great. So why don't, if people can send them to me, let's say within the next week.
Okay. Steph.
And we'll compile a list. Maybe before then we can.
Sweet. Well, hey, this is a great way to end a conversation about a wish list. How about I would love to talk about accessibility, specifically accessibility in the built environment. And I think especially as we're talking about ADUs, there's a lot of conversation around like, what are the trade-offs of accessibility and affordability for developments, and how can we make that a yes and? Thank you.
Jesse.
Yeah, I've got a strong interest in urban ag and food accessibility, and I think that that's something that BPS has looked at in the past, but isn't been looking at as much lately. So I'd love to try and re-enter some conversations on that. And that can be integrated in a lot of different ways. That doesn't have to be like its own topic, but maybe have a speaker when we have other speakers coming to talk about a topic.
I'll toss out a couple I've heard of. I'm not sure these are the ones to champion, but one thing I should note is that this is, my expectation is that these are constructive panels discussion. This is not like gripe sessions. So if there's, hopefully people have constructive ideas through them. One of them is, I'm interested in fossil fuels. The county's done some stuff. I'm interested in discussing where Portland can go further on weaning ourselves off fossil fuels. I'm also interested in, we passed a while ago energy performance scores for homes that transfer. And I think that I'm interested in learning how that's, what's worked well from that program. And if the information is not becoming transformative in terms of how homes are actually getting updated, what we might be able to do to make that achieve the results that the program was designed for. So sort of a check-in on that project. Any others right now? Okay. Should this go to the officers, or should we compile a list and bring it back to just carve a little time in a future PSC meeting?
I would suggest, sorry, may I just jump in?
Yeah.
I'd suggest the major, because if we're talking about this group plus officers, we have blown quorum completely. So, functionally, it almost requires this.
Okay, yeah, that's my instinct also. Thanks, Steph. Is that we'll compile a list and we can just maybe try out once to see how it goes. And maybe before, maybe after that, I'm not sure which would make sense. We can have a little time as a group to discuss what we'd like to try out for a future one. How about that? And prioritize from the list. Okay. Great. Well, thank you everybody for staying a little bit late. Not till 7:30, but I'm sure you'll want to spend some time outside. So with that, our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.